welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And this is part 4 of my series, Justice versus the Law. I said in a previous video that I do my best to make these videos as close to the events in question as possible to capture my state and everything. Wasn't able to do that in this case. So it's several days later, and I'm very tired. And I need to try to knock this thing out for you here. If I can get this. There's a piece of metal that poked through my seat, broke through the padding. So there's this huge thick piece of metal that just sticks out and jams right into my side whenever I'm in the car, which is of course all the time because I live in the car. Makes it exceedingly difficult to sit in here or sleep in here. So let's get to it. Alright. So what happened after the last 3 videos? I didn't have a choice. I had to get a hotel room to try to get my bearings about me and get some sleep. You know, when I found out about this whole thing with Walmart putting the sign on my window, I had only gotten 2 hours of sleep that night as it was, because I thought I would be able to sleep again. So I got the hotel room, and I was going to go to the city council meeting, but of course having the hotel room, I mean, how could it be any other way? I just zonked out. And I'm really surprised I got up in time to go to the city council meeting. I barely made it there in time, actually. But before I tell you what happened with the city council, let me tell you something else. Earlier that day, before I got the hotel, I had done everything I told you about before and made that video, both videos, including the one about my meeting with the code enforcement officer. As I thought about that more, because I'd made the video immediately. I mean, literally, I walked out the door after speaking to him and made the video. As I thought about it throughout the day, up until the city council meeting, I realized that I had been trying very hard to be as courteous, you know, non-judgmental. I'd been trying to give him the benefit of the doubt the best I could. And it may not seem like it because of how I made the last video, but everything in there was true. But the fact is, the more I thought about it, the more I went back to my gut feeling as I left that place. And so I'm just going to be honest with you and come right out with it in this case. I'm too tired to butter it up anyway. I mean, the truth is, you know, when I got talking to him, it was as I described in that video. Everything was a normal conversation until I told him I was homeless and sleeping at Walmart, and then his demeanor changed. From then on, it became a point where I got to the point fairly quickly where I just felt like, okay, in my mind I'm just thinking, Paul, just back away slowly, and maybe he will not make a suit out of your skin. I mean, that's basically what I was feeling. And the reason I felt that way is because if you look at one of my previous videos way back when, one of the problems we have with dealing with homelessness effectively in every capacity is that there's no terminology there. It's just the homeless. So someone who wanted to go out, as if you look at my drugs video, you'll see people on that drugs forum who will come onto the forum and they say, I want to become a heroin addict. I've never used heroin, but I want to become a heroin addict, okay? And lo and behold, they become a heroin addict, okay? These are the kinds of people social services will help. There's a reason why they became a drug addict. It's because they wanted to use drugs. You see, I've never had any slightest desire to ever try drugs, including marijuana. I don't want anything to do with something that alters my brain. I don't want that. I don't want it in my life. I don't want alcohol. I don't want that stuff. There's plenty of things that coffee that don't alter the mind, right? I mean, in that kind of sense. So when you look at that, there's no terminology for dealing with homelessness. You have the drug addicts, you have people who have mental illness, you have people who are just poor. There's a lot of people who fall into homelessness as a result of divorce. The government has pushed all kinds of people into homelessness, and if I were to choose one or the other, I would probably say my situation falls under that category the most, because the government did not do their jobs in any way, shape, or form, and if they had, this never would have happened. It wouldn't even come close to happening if they just done their jobs that they accept a check for. But gone over that before. The point is, there's so many reasons why people become homeless. There's so many reasons why they stay homeless. There's no terminology to discuss it, so they lump everyone together as the homeless. So if someone hears I'm homeless, they lump me in with that person who wanted to become a heroin addict, if you can imagine someone wanting to do that. They lump me in with someone who has a severe mental illness. They lump me in with someone who really could not afford to raise a family, but they felt compelled to go out and get pregnant every single year from the time they're 15 years old anyway. They lump me in with those people when they hear the homeless, and that appears to be what this code enforcement guy kind of did. So what I'm getting at is that what I sensed in him is what I call Astateophobia. In that previous video I made, I came up with a term because we've got to have a starting point. We have to be able to talk about this irrational fear and hatred and loathing of the homeless, whatever the homeless means. Homeless people. It's the same thing as racism. Just this visceral gut feeling of disgust and contempt because somebody's skin is that particular color. And if you think that makes rational sense, you might as well go watch CNN. Alright? Now, they've perverted this stuff so much that we've lost sight of what's what. Racism is pretty cut and dried. Color of your skin means nothing. Now, the color of your skin, it does mean that because people tend to group together by their skin color, race, nation, that they develop a culture. And it is possible for that culture, or that subculture, to become something that is rather contemptible to the rest of the world. That can happen. But it's not the color of the skin that causes that. It's their upbringing, it's their environment, it's that they're in a cult, in a subculture that has degenerated for whatever reason. But it's not the color of their skin. The color of the skin means absolutely nothing whatsoever. Now, there are other things like sexism. Sexism, there is a difference between men and women. And if you haven't figured that out yet, I don't know how to help you with that one. I figured it out when I was pretty young. It was kind of obvious. There are differences. They have used this for other people who, up to just people choosing behaviors. They add the word phobia at the end of this, that, and the other thing. By doing that, you create a legal term. You can debate and argue for each one of these, sexism, racism, etc., whether, what do they call it, xenophobia, all these things. You can debate whether they really exist or to what extent they exist, or you can debate these things to the end of time. But the point is, there are people who they just fear this, that, and the other thing. Or they're disgusted and feel contempt for this, that, and the other thing. And it's usually a group that's easily identified without the person who feels that contempt ever actually getting to know all the individuals in that group. Astateophobia was the term I came up with to describe this visceral hatred and contempt and disgust for the homeless. Whatever the homeless means, somebody without a home. Astateophobia. A means without, state, estate, without an estate. Phobia, fear of those without an estate, fear of those without a home. And I think it's a good term. I think it's a really good term. And academia has not picked it up yet. Doesn't surprise me, because I tell the world what academia really is. Something I did not learn, unfortunately, until I was in graduate school. A little late to learn that, but I don't expect them to use my terminology. That would acknowledge that I was actually quite confident, wouldn't it? Like I said in a previous video, I do not have a PhD, and man, oh man, am I grateful for that. What a what a badge of shame that would have been. Spent like 24 years working toward getting a PhD, and then I get in graduate school and I meet the PhDs, and I'm just horrified by what I found. Please do not give me a PhD. I don't want that kind of shame. I don't want it. But I do think I'm competent enough to develop a term, astateophobia. This code enforcement officer seemed to have astateophobia. He seemed to have, the way he flipped like a switch, and he just suddenly became gruff with me. He seemed to want to point fingers and blame and all the stuff that a racist does, you know, the same thing. It was just disgusting. So I really felt really bad about my encounter with him, and the last video I made about him was actually quite flattering. I didn't really give you the real view. I wanted to think it over and see if I was overreacting, but I really wasn't. Okay, the guy knew that I had nowhere to sleep as a result of what he was doing. Not sleeping when you're a human being can cause catastrophic harm or death to a person, and his initial instinct was to basically challenge what I was saying, fight, argue, that kind of thing. He didn't care whether I lived or died, and that immediately tells you, if all I had to tell him to change him into that was that I was homeless, then it must be the part about being homeless that triggered this within him. That's astateophobia. Now, the day before I became homeless, you know, I probably could have got a meeting with Governor Dayton, especially through my workplace back then, and we lost the lights. I probably could have got a meeting with Governor Dayton. There's no good reason I would have wanted to, but I probably could have, is the thing. The day after I became homeless, not a chance. So, did I change that much in 2 days? Or is it that someone else's view of me changed because all of a sudden this new word applied to me that didn't apply before? Minnesota Department of Health, if you look back to where they shut down that hotel and they dispersed all these poor and homeless people who were struggling so hard, who had built a small, very small, but almost a family there of support and people, a reliable place they could be to stage their lives, you know, to sleep between work and things. The people who worked there were so poor they traded it for a room there, and they didn't have anything anymore, so the employees were pretty much thrown out in the streets as well. Why would that happen? Well, it's almost certain, since there was nothing wrong with the hotel that would justify shutting it down, nothing, that it's most likely that some, you know, pretentious suburbanite rolled in there with their Mercedes that they bought on a credit card, and they pulled their leather luggage out of the trunk, or had their servant do it for them, and they go into this $50 a night room, and they probably didn't like the accommodations. You see, the thing is, according to the law of supply and demand, $50 at the present time will get you a rundown hotel. Doesn't mean it's dangerous, but it's a rundown hotel. That's what it is. $150 will get you a pretty nice hotel. $500 a night will get you 5-star luxury accommodations. Well, I bet you this pretentious Minnesotan, probably a Minnesotan, that's just the way they are that way more than most. There's other places, pockets around the country. Littleton, Colorado, for example. You've heard of that for other reasons. One of the most pompous, arrogant, ridiculous places I've ever seen in my life. Very similar to Minnesota. Just that particular community for some reason. They probably rolled in there, did not like the accommodations, but they have a sense of entitlement. They're entitled to what they consider to be adequate or good accommodations, even for $50 a night. The law of supply and demand means nothing to them. It's like, I paid for the room. I mean, they could have paid $10 for the room, and they still would have felt entitled to this, that, or the other thing. Here's the problem with that. That $50 a night room, which was a rundown hotel, there's no doubt about it, but it wasn't filthy. I never saw bugs. I didn't see mold. I didn't have a problem with it. It didn't bother me a bit. That $50 a night hotel is like a Taj Mahal to probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80% of the human population on Earth, who live in their own excrement. And if you're not aware of just how many places and how many people in this world, even today, do not have electricity or access to reliable running water, you might want to look it up. Because I'm telling you, in America, we have first world problems, for the most part. Somebody's probably really upset that they paid $50 for a room, which is a palace to most of the people who have ever lived throughout the entire duration of human history. An absolute Taj Mahal palace, a heavenly, kingdom. And some wise guy who feels entitled to 5-star accommodations for $50 probably got upset. Oh, this thing's digging into me. And went to the Minnesota Department of Health. The Minnesota Department of Health, which is a useless organization, needs something to justify its existence. So what do? They send that gang of thugs out there at tax dollar expense. This huge bunch of people who just stand around and do absolutely nothing with their gang jackets. And you watch the videos about that to see what happened. But the point is, there's nothing going on there. There's nothing going on there in terms of that hotel being a threat to anybody. So the question becomes, if the Minnesota Department of Health claims on camera to justify their existence because they're helping people and they're protecting people, they're protecting their health specifically, protecting them from harm, from risk, I love that word, risk, then why did they throw a whole bunch of people, including the employees, out into the streets right before the holidays, which is to say right before a Minnesota winter as it was starting? Because that hurts people. In fact, that doesn't just hurt people, that puts them at risk, at very real, serious risk, not academic risk. Okay, we're not talking about statistical significance and that nonsense here. We're talking about the real world, risk of suffering tremendously or dying. The Minnesota Department of Health is the one who threw all those people out into that. Why would they do that? It doesn't take a great leap of logic to figure out that if it was Governor Dayton staying at that cheap motel, if it was whoever this person or persons were with the credit card Mercedes and the leather luggage, if they were staying at the hotel, the Department of Health would not have thrown them out into the cold. Who did they throw out into the cold? Poor people, homeless people. Do a little math there. Astateophobia. The people at the Minnesota Department of Health didn't have a problem doing it in this case because they don't care if the homeless suffer and die. It doesn't matter what they claim on television, on camera. When the cameras are rolling, it doesn't matter what they say their charter is for, what they're supposed to be doing, helping people, protecting them from health risks. They threw a group of people out into far, infinitely more risk than they had when they were in that hotel. Why would they do that? Because of the people. Because the people were poor and homeless. Astateophobia. It's the same thing as this code enforcement officer. You see, when we don't have a terminology like this, you can't go into court and fight the battle. You can't claim astateophobia, that this was an act of hatred, that this was a hate crime, basically. You can't do that when you don't even have any terminology. There is no term for fear of the homeless. Well, there is now, because I created one. Please spread the word. Maybe even academia will take it. So I wanted to get that out of the way. I wanted to point out what my real feelings were toward this code enforcement officer. I was much too kind to him in that other video. When I left there, that guy had me scared to death. Because only hearing the word homeless suddenly turned him into someone who was all business and professional, into someone who was a heartless, callous, cruel, vicious person who didn't provide me with any solutions. Just social services, shelters, without knowing what he's talking about. And of course, from his perspective, he goes back to work, I go out and suffer, possibly die. Didn't bother him. Astateophobia. So by the time the city council meeting rolled around in the evening, again, I had dozed off at that hotel. I don't know how I got up for it. I barely got there in time, but I go into the city council meeting. It's a full house for the most part. Almost, most of the seats were filled, which is kind of unusual. Excuse me, for a city council meeting. And that was great, because I wanted to be able to speak what I had to say in front of residents of Burnsville. I never get to speak to people. Nobody invites me to come to speak. I've even gone to places like the Lions Clubs and the Rotary and offered to come in, because my father was in that and I know what they're about. And I tell them, look, the real world is out here as far as what's happening with social services and homelessness. You're not seeing the real thing. You need somebody who knows what they're talking about coming in and informing these people. And they won't touch it. They don't want to hear it. I mean, it's not like they heard what I had to say and then they didn't like it. They just don't want to hear it in the first place. So I have to take what opportunities I can get. Well, here was one, a city council meeting with a full room. I'm like, this is great. I have to make this point, this is a very important point, and I get to do it in front of a bunch of people, and some of them might tell some others, and maybe somebody in this town will actually learn what's going on. So, now, who they had there was interesting, too. They had a row of veterans behind me, veterans of foreign wars. These were elderly people, with the uniforms, the hats, and there were also a bunch of young people, teenagers, and they were getting ready to join the military. If I heard them right, and I'm not sure, but I think they said the high school principal was there, maybe assistant principal or something. That's somebody I would like to have around, especially since I get to see when their students are buying all the drugs, and I've talked to the students to see how they procure and sell those drugs to the other students in that principal's school, which apparently they're not real familiar with. You'd think they'd want to know something about this, but another story. There was a police chief from a neighboring community there. So there was this big cross-section of people. And I'm like, this is great. Now, granted, a city council meeting is televised as well. But it's a city council meeting, all right? There's two people who are watching it, but they've already fallen asleep on public access. And then there's maybe 4 stoners who they're flipping the channels and they got stuck on public access and they drop the remote and they're just too stoned to pick it up, so they stare at it and they're seeing lollipops and clouds anyway. That's who watches city council meetings on public access. That and maybe a couple of people who are about 97 years old. But I wasn't going to get a whole lot of exposure on the TV for that one. So I was really happy to be able to speak, in front of these people. So here's what happens. The city council meeting does not start on time because there's only 2 of the 5 city council members there, and they need 3 to have a quorum. So they're delayed a bit. Their understanding is that one of them is going to show up, and that'll give them a quorum of 3. So it didn't start too late. It was only a few minutes late, and the third one did come in. That's okay. I mean, stuff happens, and not a big deal. But it was hard for me not to be lost on the irony that, I'm in this situation. I just get done working 40 hours a week. I go to sleep 2 hours, and I get a notice on my window saying you're being towed next time you do that. And yet, I've just had my 2nd anniversary at my job. Both years, perfect attendance. Nobody in that entire place can even touch my attendance, period. They just can't. And the reason is because I was raised with an ethic that says if I have a responsibility to be somewhere, I've got to be there. And I couldn't miss the irony that these people ran for public office. They spent money, they went through the time, they did all these things to be elected to office, and then they weren't even there. I don't want to harp on that because I know things happen, and I've learned a long time ago not everybody has the work ethic that I do. But I couldn't help missing the irony. I was going to go sleep in a car that night, but the people who did not show up to the city council meeting were going to sleep in a home that night. And if you don't understand why that kind of thing bothers me when I just see it over and over all around me, and the very people who do those things often, not in this case, but in many other cases, like the code enforcement, for example, perhaps, look at me as if I'm inferior and they're superior. There's a bit of an injustice there that is very hard to live with on a day-to-day basis. So when the third member got there, and let me make it clear that I like this city council, so I'm certainly not trying to bust their chops. Things happen, I understand. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm just pointing out the irony. When they started the city council meeting, the first thing they did was have a moment of silence. Everyone stood up and they had a moment of silence. And I thought that was wonderful. It was a great touch. I really respect them for that. The next thing they did was pledge allegiance. Again, kudos to them for that. I myself am in a place now where I'm trying to figure out whether I want to pledge allegiance in the sense of the Pledge of Allegiance. Let me try to get some light here so it focuses. The reason isn't because I don't have allegiance. I love this country dearly. It's just that the Pledge of Allegiance is a pledge to a flag, and I don't really care about the flag. I respect it. It disgusts me to see someone disrespect it or burn it, but it's not the flag you're pledging to, it's what the flag stands for that you're pledging allegiance to, the Constitution of the United States. It's nothing really about the pledge itself. But anyway, they had the pledge, and I was very grateful for that. But then the first thing they did in the city council meeting was they had a ceremony. And it was a ceremony for these young people. There were about 6 of them maybe, high school students, who were joining different branches of the military. And that's why they had all the military people, the veterans of foreign wars and the families of these young people. That's why they were there. So they had a ceremony that to me took about 20 minutes. I don't know, it's probably more like 10. But it went on quite a while because, I didn't have any skin in that game. So I watched it, and they're just honoring these kids for joining the service, and I'm grateful to them for doing that as well. In fact, I was looking forward to, when I was done, shaking the hands of these VFW fellas, thanking them for their service, because I'm incredibly grateful for that. I've had great encounters with VFW throughout my life, and so they go through this thing, and again, it's about 10 minutes, maybe even 15. I don't know. It goes on quite a while, right? But when they get done, they have a group photo. So everyone goes up in front of the city council and stands there. So all the kids, their families, these veterans, basically everybody in the room right? So the room almost basically clears out, and everyone's standing in front of me, including the city council, and I'm just sitting in the front row, just by myself, just having nothing to do with this. I've got something so important to talk about next that it really has to deal with whether people live or die, or at least whether they're going to have a life worth living of any kind. It's pretty important stuff. And I'm the only person who's even thinking in those terms. Everyone else is just enthralled with this ceremony for these kids. And that's great that they're having that for them. That's great. But the whole room, as they went up front, and this photographer came up in front of me on this little stool, and the photographer takes these pictures, and he keeps backing the stool up, and at some point I thought he was going to just, like, stick his butt right in my face to try to get a better picture. And I was just kind of chuckling to myself. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's like, look at what these people are thinking is so important. How am I ever going to get anybody engaged in what I have to say? I mean, what I have to say only involves other people, and that's hard enough to get people involved. But you've got Astateophobia to deal with, all this stuff. How am I going to get these people interested in anything I'm saying? And then it dawned on me, uh-oh, you know what? These people are not going to stay to listen to these guys talk about, how to zone the plumbing in a sewer somewhere in Burnsville. These people are going to leave. As soon as the ceremony's over, they're out of there, right? And I just, sat in that chair and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't believe this. I've just been sitting here for 10 or 15 minutes, excited for the chance to finally talk in front of a large group of people in this community, and they're all going to leave before I can open my mouth. So they got done with the ceremony, and that's exactly what happened. Someone said, oh, it's punch and pie in the basement, and just, they're gone. I mean, it's like, if you're in a spacecraft, you're in the space station, and you open the door, and just, and I look behind me, and there's all these empty chairs, and there's 3 people left in the room behind me. In front of me are the 3 city council members who were there, the clerk, another person who I believe was the planner, and possibly a few other support staff milling about. There were 3 people left in the room. Then it was my turn to speak. I suspect those photographs they took of those kids are going to end up somewhere, like in a newspaper perhaps, some kind of communication to the people of Burnsville, Minnesota. Just a little ceremony for kids who are going to join the military anyway, even if you don't have the ceremony. There was nothing. There was no photograph. There was no press coverage of what I had to say. So that kind of tells you what I was dealing with when I went up there. And none of this is to put them down or anything. It was just one of these, I can't believe this kind of things. I mean, nobody's planning this all out and conspiring against me or anything. It's just, this is the kind of thing I encounter everywhere. And I couldn't believe it was happening again. I had been so excited about all these people in the room, and they were gone. Like that hee-haw thing, and she was gone. Where are you tonight? Why did you leave me here all alone? I searched the world over and I thought I found true love. You met another and you was gone. They was gone. They was gone. So it was just me and the city council and the 3 witnesses in the back. Alright, so This seat is killing me today. This hurts so bad. Alright, let me check my notes, make sure I'm not leaving anything out. That's it. So, when it was time for me to speak to the city council, I raised my hand. Is there anyone here for citizen comments? Me. They invited me up there. I had made copies of that pink piece of paper that the Walmart person, I assume it was, put on my car, and I handed it to the 3 people who were there. And, you know, they're very courteous. Again, I like the city council quite a bit. So I started giving my talk. Now, keep in mind, too, again, the ceremony for the kids went on for, it seemed like 15 minutes, roughly. It was probably 10, but it seemed like about that much. Citizens' comments get 2 to 4, they get 2 to 4 minutes. So they had 10, 20 minutes to talk about, you know, here's a bag of candy and punch and pie and, you know, thank you to kids who are going in the military anyway. I get 2 to 4 minutes to talk about needing help to avoid a catastrophic, horrific situation that could threaten my life. So I jumped into it. I had not been able to prepare because I fell asleep at the hotel. Honestly, I don't remember what I said. I do my best to bring up different ways of stating the same problem to try to emphasize what's going on. So I know I had, in one sense, I remember I had, you know, when I described what happened and what the seriousness of it was, I tied it to the law versus justice that is the subject of this video series. I did make a quick pitch, although I didn't follow up, but I made a quick pitch about how I would love to publicly debate the person responsible for this, because I want them in front of the people who pay their salaries, the taxpayers of Burnsville. I want them to explain why they think it's more important that government dictates which vehicles are parked in a private parking lot than it is that human beings are allowed to sleep. I really want that balance sheet put out in front of the people who pay their salaries, and I think that's only fair. Now, I pitched that idea briefly, but I didn't follow up on it. I'm not facetious about that at all. I will stand, if they want to have a debate at the Ames Center, I will stand on one side of the stage, and you can have every member of City Hall on the other side of the stage. That doesn't scare me in the slightest, and I mean that. I would love it if they would do that. But I went over everything. As I did it, I started getting a little more upset because even I started realizing more problems with this issue as I was speaking it out loud. For example, the quality of the writing, I actually have it here, don't I? Now, granted, what they gave me was just one page, and presumably there was another or one or more pages beyond this. There's no signature. It doesn't end. There's no salutation. So this isn't the whole thing, I'm sure, that the city sent to Walmart. But the writing here is pretty bad. This is not clearly explaining much of anything. It's referring to ordinances that when I went to City Hall, you couldn't get your hands on. You couldn't look at them. So what, is Walmart supposed to just take this on faith or something? I mean, how do you confirm anything? I mean, this is just woefully insufficient. And again, as a writer, as I thought about that, I started getting really offended. It's like, okay, so once again, my writing is better than this, but I live in a car, and this person has the power to hurt other people officially, in an official capacity. And these things just kept coming up, so I might have bounced around a bit more than I usually do, but I finished up. And here's where I have to admit my own shame in this case. When I finished up, you know, I think I thanked them for listening, but realize what I've dealt with in Minnesota. Nobody helps. Nobody cares. When I went to the city council in the town where I became homeless, to have them help me with all these people, these neighbors, and this useless landlord, and the police who would do nothing, the city council did nothing. They didn't care. They wanted to go on to zoning questions. They couldn't have cared less. So, much to my shame, I just kind of turned around and started leaving. I was just going to leave. I said my piece. What else can I do? And that was unfortunate, and it was wrong of me. I didn't give them a fair chance. One of the councilwomen called me back, said, "Paul, come back here." So I went back to the podium, and here's where it got interesting. The three members of the city council who were there, they took what I said very seriously. They were attentive. They were attentive to me throughout as I spoke. None of them, like at that other city council, where people are sitting there doodling and not even making sure I know that they're not looking at me. These people looked at me, they listened to me, they were respectful, they showed me dignity, and I greatly appreciate that. But what they did when I was finished was they asked questions. They asked me some clarifying questions, then they looked over at the planner and they asked questions. They asked, I wrote it down because I wanted to say it. They asked many questions. Well, they asked questions, first of all. They asked many questions, not just a few. They asked good questions. And they asked relevant questions, and they did so of the correct people. They asked for clarification. They asked for action to be taken to get back to them on it. And at one time, I'm almost positive I heard one of the city council members ask that planner flat out, "Is this an attempt to clear the homeless out of there?" And, you know, it's hard for me to express just how refreshing that was to hear. These people not only cared and gave it the attention it deserved, but they actually comprehended what the issue was. They grasped the situation. They did the right thing. They asked the right questions of the right people. And they even came right out. I don't know if it's political correctness that prevents people from doing this or what. I'm pretty blunt about these things. If it needs to be asked or said, I'll ask or say it. They did that. One of them, I'm almost positive, they said, "Is this an attempt to clear the homeless out of there?" Now, I think they might have been asking the wrong person because, at least from what I saw, the one person who seems to have a bit of distaste for the homeless seems to be that code enforcement officer. Or at least that's how it felt to me. And that person seems to be behind this. And maybe this is an attempt to clear the homeless out. Maybe they're using an ordinance which is written so poorly that you can't tell what it's about. This doesn't even mention cars. This only mentions big rig trucks. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm not sitting inside of a big rig truck. I'm sitting inside of a car. But somebody seems to be using this ordinance of these vehicles cannot park in the lot overnight, and they're trying to make sure that I can't park in the lot overnight. Why could that be? Is it because I need glasses to read now? Is it because my hair is gray? Is it the shirt? Do they not like my shirt? Or could it be because I'm homeless and they have a distaste for homeless people? For a city council person to ask that flat out, I mean, in a less formal environment, I probably would have thrown my hands in the air and said, "Hell yes!" It was awesome. I don't know what else to say. It was wonderful. This city council impressed me so much in every regard. I can't say a bad word about them. Nothing. They did exactly what I would hope any city council would do. They did it immediately, then they seemed to do it naturally, which is beautiful. You know, one of the things I learned in business, I learned early on, is when you're hiring other people, no matter where you're at, pretend that you and your family own the business, and the people you hire are going to determine whether or not your family business succeeds or fails, whether or not your family will be prosperous or poor, whether your family name is going to, be a good name in the community or sad name. And that you hire people on the basis of that kind of criteria. In the state of Minnesota, the people I've dealt with, those police officers in the other community where I became homeless, the landlord, the people who moved in, the neighbors, the city council there, all of the state agencies, all the way up to Governor Dayton, Attorney General Swanson, Klobuchar, Amy Klobuchar, running for President of the United States right now. By that criteria, there is no way on God's green earth I would ever even think about hiring any of those individuals if my family's well-being depended upon their performance. I would not give them consideration based on the performance I saw of them. If Governor Dayton came in and applied for a job, forget it, kid. If Attorney General Lori Swanson came in, you're useless. You didn't even respond. You didn't even respond while you accepted a paycheck. Go work at McDonald's. I'm not putting my family's reputation and my family's prosperity in your hands, lady. It ain't gonna happen. Governor Dayton, take a powder. You're out of here. Klobuchar, oh, don't even get me started. But these city council people here in Burnsville, Minnesota, I'm telling you right now, if any of those three came up and applied for a job where my family's well-being depended on it, they would get very strong consideration. I was so impressed with the way they handled this. I don't see that kind of competence and that kind of high performance in Minnesota. It was refreshing beyond belief. Now I still don't have a resolution or an answer on it, and I wouldn't expect to that quick, but what they did was magnificent. I haven't seen that in Minnesota. I can't say a bad word about them. Thank you so much, Burnsville City Council. You did magnificently. Magnificently. They did things like ask the planner to clarify things with Walmart to get some more information on what the ordinance really is and such. Now, I've had to work ever since then, so I have no idea what's going on with that. That's why I'm so tired, because I've just been working and not sleeping. Trying to move along here. I had some other things I don't want to make. I'm trying to keep the time down on this. It's hard when I'm tired. It's harder to focus. Let's see. So I pretty much covered that. Oh yes. After I was finished, they asked me to speak. One of the three people in the room was a police detective, and the city council asked me to speak with him. And it was almost like he was there knowing I was coming in that day. It was almost like he was planted there for that reason, but that's okay. So I went out and I spoke to him, and he gave me his card, and he talked to me a bit about it, and again, very, very nice, very respectful, treated me with dignity. He just did exactly what you would want him to. And the interesting thing was, he told me that he had spoken to the code enforcement officer, or the way he phrased it was, I spoke to that person you spoke to earlier. And I got thinking, well, why? Well, that seems like a coincidence. Why would you speak to him about that? And I don't know, I was driving back to the hotel maybe when I kind of figured out what happened. Here's what probably happened. The code enforcement officer, I don't know if I've said this yet, but he said a couple things to me very accusatory. Like I said, he started kind of jumping on me once he heard I was homeless. He didn't seem to like me being homeless. And he said things like, "You're breaking the law." And I was just like, oh my God. It's like, really? I've never heard any person ever say that to me in my life that I'm aware of. That's fascinating that you're saying, "You're breaking the law." It's like, how am I breaking the law by sleeping in a private parking lot where the owner allows you to sleep in the parking lot? I'm missing something here. You can't present me with a law. All you can present me with is this poorly written, partial nothingness. I don't know. Who knows what this about big rigs? What law am I breaking exactly? And but another thing he said to me was, when I told him, I told him, well, the problem is, it's another department of the city that told me to sleep at Walmart. It was the police. And he looked at me and he said, "They're not supposed to do that. They're wrong. They're not supposed to tell you that." I'm like, well, take it up with them then. I mean, that's what they told me. Okay, that's hence the racketeering accusation in my previous video. One department tells me to sleep at Walmart. The other department fines Walmart when I sleep there, as this department told me to. Let me untangle this web. So I think what happened was this guy, being a code enforcement officer, you know, wants to be in control of everything. He probably just marched right over to the police department, which is in the next building, and, "What are you doing telling people to sleep at Walmart?" It's probably what happened. Now, according to this detective, it sounds to me like the police put this guy in his place. Kind of told him the way life really is. This is for the Burnsville Police Department. I love that police department, I have to say. This guy didn't seem to know what he was talking about, and he seemed to, I don't know, it just boggles my mind that he has a bed to sleep in at night, and I've got a steel bar in my side all night in a car. You can't make this stuff up. No, anyway, the detective was very nice. I spoke to him a bit about this, that, and the other thing, and he gave me suggestions, gave me his card. I really need to speak to the general manager at Walmart about this, but I can't do it till my work week's over, and it's like another day away. So anyway, that's what happened there. Then I went back, I went to the hotel, and I finished making those first 3 parts of this video. I was editing those, and beyond that, there wasn't much I could do. I had to, you know, get ready to go back to work for another week. So that's what happened with this. Again, my goal here is to document what's happened. I don't know what the resolution's going to be yet. My hope is that the city talked to Walmart, made it clear to them, we're not talking about cars. We're talking about big rig trucks, maybe RVs. But, because this code enforcement officer had said something like, you can't just, you know, live there. You can't just, you know, camp there. I can't, he put it something like that. You can't just camp out in their parking lot. And I'm thinking, brother, you don't know what homelessness is. If you think I'm having... Last time I went camping, I had fun. I had a great time. This isn't fun. This is called human suffering. This is called third world conditions in a first world nation. And if that guy thinks I'm having a camp out or a tailgate party, or that I'm living in their parking lot, I got my little propane stove and I'm cooking up there, and I've got a little outhouse with running water and a toilet, you know, so when I get diarrhea from the horrifying stuff that I have to eat, instead of having problems inside this car, which is what happens most of the time, I just walk over to the bathroom and use it because I'm living in their parking lot, right? If I want a good meal, I go to the kitchen and I prepare a meal. Because that's what you do when you're living in a parking lot, right? No, what I do is I roll in after a hard day's work at night when there's almost nobody at Walmart anyway. I kick the seat back and I sleep. I put the seat up in the morning and I drive away. That's a little different than the tailgate party that this guy seems to think I'm having. Ah, that guy's starting to make me mad. He just, the more I think about how ignorant he was. Burnsville Police Department. Oh, I love you guys. It just sounded like they put this code enforcement officer in his place. I wish I could have seen that. Oh my goodness. So I still have to find out whether that has been communicated to Walmart, and then of course the big question, ask the Walmart general manager. It's their discretion whether or not people can sleep in the parking lot like that. I have to ask the general manager, not the assistant manager I spoke to before, do you have a problem with this or not? Because the fact is, if they say, well, actually I do, I don't want people sleeping in the parking lot, you know what? I can't sleep in the parking lot at that point. And I'm not going to raise a ruckus. I'm not going to go to Walmart and complain about it. That's the rule. The general manager has the discretion, and I have to abide by what their decision is on that. I have to respect that. It's private property. They're in charge of the place. That's the end of that. But the thing is, up until now, they haven't had anything to say about it. They haven't had any problem with it. The assistant manager told me that they didn't have any problem with it. I don't think Walmart has a problem with it at this particular location. So my hope is that the city has communicated with Walmart, and that when I go talk to the general manager, they'll say, well, this was a misunderstanding. There seems to be a rogue element there in the city hall who was trying to exploit, the vagueness of this big rig thing to kind of get his own, personal Armenian genocide done against the homeless or something, and get them shoved out of town. Something like that, because that's what it appears is happening here. And I don't know for sure that's what's going on, but all the pieces of the puzzle are, as they go together, they're starting to show me a picture of one or more people in City Hall who just have a distaste for the homeless, and they're just exploiting the fact that they have power to deal with big rig trucks to use that against other people who they have something against personally, which is sickening. Thank God we have a very good city council there and a very good police department there. I can't give them enough gratitude for what they've done so far. It was a good experience overall. I wish all those people could have heard what I had to say. I wish they could have observed the city council's response to it, so that they know how good of a city council they have. Because that's pretty rare. But, I guess they got some punch and pie out of it in the basement, so. But again, this just happens all the time. I could not believe it when I realized that they were going to leave that room before I could open my mouth. It's just... God. There were probably more people in that room than who will watch this video. I mean, it's... Oh, good heavens. I get loopy when I'm tired. Alright, I'm going to sign off. I got to chug a lot of coffee tonight because I got one more day of work, and I am just dragging. Big time. Thank you so much for watching. I should have another installment of this, hopefully the last one that will tie up the ends. Hopefully what I said with the general manager will transpire, and this will be over, except perhaps for if someone in the city was trying to hurt me in that kind of a manner that puts me at such serious risk, I'd have to look at whether or not I want to pursue that any further, because that's an attack. That's an attack. And it's kind of like they said in that documentary about the BTK killer, he found a way to destroy lives without having to actually kill. And to me, that's kind of what I felt like was going on with, if not with the code enforcement officer himself, the whole planning department, their whole subculture they have there, where they feel that these zoning ordinances give them the power to go out and just do what the Department of Health did. Come and knock on my door in a hotel that I paid for and tell me to step outside into the cold in my shorts while they go inside and search my room. That's sickening. Besides being a Fourth Amendment violation, it is absolutely sickening. They have no right to do that. They could have waited 2 hours till the room was vacated and then did their inspection. And if that's what's going on with the planning department, if they're thinking they can use these ordinances that were created for other purposes to try to clear out a group of individuals who they have something against personally, then we got to look at what kind of action can be taken on that. That's to come in the future. That's all I have for you. I'm going to shut this down. My goodness, I hope this went on for an hour. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to keep these videos short, but that's how much I had to say. I'll let you go now. Please come back for the next video. Thank you so much for watching.